and I'm Rebecca.
Welcome to our very first live Instagram chat to talk about our forthcoming book, Field Guide to the Heart, Poems of Love, Comfort, and Hope. So I'm going to introduce Rebecca, my friend Rebecca, and she's a wonderful poet whose work has appeared in anthologies, periodicals, magazines, and she has authored dozens of children's books. Rebecca teaches poetry workshops to writers, teachers, and students across the country. Yes.
And I'm going to introduce my friend Georgia. She's an educator, poet, and author of over 18 books, including our new book coming out, A Field Guide to the Heart, Poems of Love, Comfort, and Loss. She also has a great book out called My Thoughts Are Clouds, which is poems for mindfulness. She teaches poetry and literacy in schools and conferences around the world. Yes. So
we wanted to start out today with just talking a little bit about how we wrote A Field Guide to the Heart, the process. And so it started actually during the worst time of the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, and I wasn't writing anything, and I was overwhelmed and scared, and just felt kind of flat, and as many of us I think were. So Rebecca and I were emailing back and forth, and I think she was feeling a similar way, and so we decided to give each other poetry prompts or invitations. And we did that for months. That's how it started. And we began to write poems. And they weren't necessarily poems about COVID, but it was just different kinds of prompts.
And it mostly involved poems that comforted us or made us question, how do we find comfort during this time? And how do we find hope? And I was also going through my parents being on lockdown and in a facility, and I wasn't writing, and so this got us going because our first love is poetry, and so that's how this book started. I was wondering if we should each read something from the introduction real quick about the book.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts for everybody. Two poets, two friends, reaching out to each other, hearts on paper. We discovered a strength and a resilience that we didn't know we had. This is how it came to be. A Field Guide to the Heart is part a poetry book, but also it is part a journal, so that our readers can write down the emotions that they have been feeling or feel as they read each poem that we've written, either their response to it or their own emotions.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll even read the first poem in the book, which is also kind of part of the introduction, is called, and I wrote it was called A Field Guide to the Lost. And I felt like this, writing during this time was really a way to find my way back home. So the poem actually, it looks like it's part of one of those journals, where you put your name and address, but it's the poem that starts the book. So A Field Guide to the Lost. Printed on the first page of my notebook are the words, "In case of loss, please return to phone, address." This notebook is my field guide to the lost, to what's lost in me. If I follow the trail of words, it will lead me home. Exactly what writing this book did for me was that it really led me home to my own words, my own writing, and I highly recommend writing a book with a friend, because you have these amazing conversations. So we would get together on Zoom and talk about our poems, and all of a sudden I felt like my heart lifted. Everything became a little bit lighter. And the book is both a journal and a book of poems, because we really wanted people to read the poems and have a place, a space for reflection, a space to write your own poems, to doodle, to do whatever you do after we read poetry.
Yes, and it's so great to glance down and see different people we know that have joined in. And I'll start with this poem, and it's about hope. There Will Always Be is the title. There will always be waves rushing in and tumbling out. the promise of the moon, the bronze of the morning sun. Sadness is not forever, but let hope be. Let it sit by seaside towns and wander in cities. Let it linger in schoolyards and shipyards and farms. Let it call to you with a healing chant and the constant chime of the clock. There will always be the burble of streams, the charm of birdsong, the whisper of wind. Sadness is not forever, but let hope be. A little bit about this poem when I was writing it. I was trying to think of things that will always be, that it's a constant in our lives. What are things in our lives that are constant, that we can always plan on and depend on? And then, as most poets do, I threw in things that matter to me. For instance, when I say the constant chime of the clock, my mom has always been a lover of clocks. For as long as I can remember, I have heard the chimes of clocks, the cuckoo clocks. She loves clocks, and so many of my poems will show clock, because to me that means hope, that time keeps moving, and that the love of something will always be there. And so that's a little bit about that poem.
I love that poem. And, you know, one of the things I realized when you were talking was that when we were exchanging poems back and forth and having conversations, is that we got to know each other as writers so well, so that Rebecca and I laugh about this a lot, that I know her favorite words. And one of them is penny, and another is clock, and another one is umbrella. And when she puts those in the poem, I know that she's really kind of tuned in. So I don't know if you know my favorite words or
and marbles.
And marbles, right? And key, skeleton key. Love skeleton key. So
you covered them all. Images are very important to you, and writing from the heart, of course. And you have a lot of, I would say my words are more objects, and maybe your favorite words are more emotional, possibly.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would say that. So I'm going to read a poem that I wrote about. There's a game that I play that I don't know if you all played it as well. It's called Would You Rather. And when I was a little girl, I would play with my friends, and we would just say, would you rather, eat ice cream sundae, or would you rather eat a bag of chips? And these were kind of silly choices in the beginning. And then after a while, the choices became more serious. And I look back at that now, at how the choices changed and how we were young then. And so anyway, the poem is called When I Was a Girl. We took turns asking silly questions. Would you rather eat an Almond Joy or a Slurpee? Would you rather live in a tent or a treehouse? At some point, our questions turned serious. Would you rather lose your brother or your sister, your mother or your father? We were young. None of us had lost anyone yet. We didn't know then how fragile the heart is. So a lot of people have asked us how long we've known each other and how we met, which is actually very synchronistic. And Rebecca and I, we've been friends a long time now. And the most amazing thing was that we knew each other. We would go to conferences and we would see each other. And, I knew Rebecca's work. And finally, one time we sat down at breakfast, and we started to talk about where you're from. And I said, well, I'm from, right now I'm not from here, but I live in South Florida. I've been here for the last 10 years.
And you said, oh, you wouldn't know where it is.
What?
You said, oh, and you wouldn't know it.
Yeah, you wouldn't know the place. It's really small, and Singer Island. And so she just put her coffee down. She said, oh my gosh. She said, I've been going there with my parents for years, and we have a place there. and And so the next time she came down there to see her parents, we actually walked on the beach. We went out to lunch, and I picked her up, and that was the beginning of a long and wonderful friendship. So,
yeah, yeah. What a small world. That's where my parents lived half of the year, and I would go all the time, and never knew she was right down the street beach.
yeah. So we worked on this project, but we've worked on other projects. We teach together, but we also have a book we just that is just being illustrated now for children. It's called Welcome to the Wonder House.
Yeah.
And we worked on those poems together as well, which was, just an incredible project. And so now it's being illustrated, and it will be out in, I think, a year and a half or something like that.
Being illustrated by the amazing Deborah Friedman. Yes. So you're very lucky and feel very honored.
So Rebecca, what's your writing process?
The process, okay.
Yeah.
For me, and I've talked about this probably a lot of people know, I do both. I'm all over the place. I write on note cards, I write in notebooks, I write on the computer. But what I love revision, and I love playing with lines. I want to get of course, the emotion and the heart of the poem down, but I want it to be a well-crafted poem. And so then I work a lot with changing lines and substituting, plugging in different words, and doing a lot of research on different words and how they work and how they feel and how they sound with the line. Then, having said that, I usually tape up my revisions around me at my computer when I finally get to the revision. So I kind of tape them up on the wall. I've always done this. And so I can kind of see the different revisions, and maybe I can take a line, I'm a very visual person. And so that's how I kind of, a little bit, a snippet of how I write my poems. How about you, George?
Well, I usually start with, there's kind of a tug at my heart, and it could be really, and I know that sounds cliche, but it really does feel like that. There's kind of something that, it's almost like my heart skips a beat, and I know then that might be a poem, and then a line usually comes, and words come to that feeling. And I also, and sometimes I'll write the line down, sometimes I'll just live with that line in my mind for a while. But I also, the pictures in my mind, imagery, that's really my guide when I write. And then also sound. So it's really that combination of paying attention to the images that come, but also the sounds of the words that I choose. And we've worked, both of us have worked together on we've spent an hour looking at each other's poems and saying, okay, so what about this word? And we'll just, we'll say the words out loud and work together, especially with this book. So it really is it's a long process. I'm a much slower writer than you, Rebecca, I think. I need to let it sit for days and weeks and sometimes even months before I can see it. I feel like I can't see my poems in the beginning when I write them. So I'm slower.
I kind of have this ADD, OCD thing that I just kind of keep going. Maybe too much, but yeah.
Oh, it's great. I love that, because you'll say, okay, yeah, this poem is finished, and you've done it in a day or two, and I'll say, well, I just don't know. I just have to let this sit for a while. And even when this book was finished, we drove Terry, our editor, crazy, because I kept sending her revisions and tweaks right up until the moment they sent it off to be printed. So I'd say, I promise this is the last time that I'm going to change a word. Thank you. I just saw Terry's comment. I love the editing process with both of you. Thank you. And you were so patient. So I am grateful.
Let's see if we have some questions.
Do you set aside a specific daily time to write, or do you stop and write when a poem, inspiration, or idea comes?
I really try to, I always have, for, 40 years or whatever. I've always written in the morning. When morning time to me, mind is more open.
I feel the same. I feel like I cannot write. I don't really write at night. I feel like my brain is filled with all the stuff of the day. So I usually write in the morning. And I don't really set aside a time, but I do feel like because life is busy and so I can't necessarily sit every single morning and write, but I try to write every single day. It really helps to work on a project. So when Rebecca and I were working on this book, I mean, I wrote every single day, no matter what, and just found the time. So if you're working on a project, I think that there's an inspiration. There's a sense of let's see what this project, how we can get this going and really wrestle with it. And I find that it helps me focus working on a project. So I love that. I love to kind of, you can't work on a book all the time. So in between time, I just, even when I'm making breakfast, I begin to have lines that come to me and are drinking my first cup of coffee. And I either go write them down or put them in my notebook, or I just kind of store them in my mind. So that was a great question. Thank you. My favorite poets, contemporary poets, are, I love Lucille Clifton. I love Maggie Smith. I love Clint Smith, Ted Kooser, Galway Canal. I love them partly because they kind of speak what I think is sometimes unsayable. And I feel like just them putting their words down on paper helps give voice to my own poems and to my own words. So, and it helps me navigate through any kind of pain or sadness that I'm going through, these poets. So those are the poets that I read a lot. And I know that Maggie Smith has a new book out, and I just got it and I started to read. So these are the poets that when they have a new book come out, I immediately go and buy it and read it.
Favorite poets? Okay, well, Billy Collins, Ted Kooser. I do love Maggie Smith. I love Auden. I love some poems of Ray Bradbury. I like a new upcoming, well, I wouldn't call her upcoming, but a new contemporary, Kelly Agadon. Off the top of my head.
And I wonder, Rebecca, why I love Ted Kooser also. What is it about Ted Kooser's work that you love? That
it's accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I think it tells a story. Most of his poems tell a story that can be related to. It's just real accessible. But yet he also has great images and metaphors. And
so I'm just looking to see if are there questions. Somebody asked, what are you reading right now?
I mean, I'm always reading all different kinds of poetry books. I go back over my old poetry books again and again, and I read some new poetry books. But I'm also reading a lot of beautiful lyrical picture books, and I'm reading a couple of biographies actually about songwriters.
Right now I'm reading, I'm actually listening. I listen to a lot of books because I go for long walks and I listen, and I also love the rhythm of the words as I'm listening. Yes. To me, I mean, what could be better, right? To be serenaded. And sometimes I listen to poetry, but now I'm listening to a book called Hamnet, and it's about Shakespeare. And it's a story of Shakespeare and his son and his whole family, and it's just so beautifully written. It's poetry. Oh. So I listen for poetry in all the books that I listen to.
So I agree. Yeah. One of my favorite books ever is The Prince of Tides, and Pat Conroy. Even though he's a novelist, he's a poet too. And there's so many beautiful lines and metaphors in The Prince of Tides. I also read a question that it said, is it harder to write poems about sadness and emotion than it is other poems? I don't think it's harder or easier. I think it just needs a different mood. I just think for me, when I'm ready to put down on paper how I'm really feeling, sometimes it scares me. Sometimes it scares me to actually put down what I'm actually feeling. I'm afraid I might fall apart. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I go ahead and write the poem, or sometimes I can't. And then I'll write about marbles or the moon and then come back to that. So it just depends on the heart at the time, emotion. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I feel like I know what you mean about being scared, but I feel like I feel compelled sometimes to write. If there's something that I need to write that's painful, I'm more compelled to write it. I don't know if it's easier. It's just that if I don't get it down, I'll feel kind of like my day is not quite together. It's not quite smooth. It's not quite, I just can't, I feel uncomfortable. So if I write it down, sometimes that relieves that. And I feel like there is that kind of compulsion. If there's something that's really happening in my life and I need to write it down, I can write the poem in one sitting, but then I have to let it sit for a while. But it really does help. So that's a great question. So another question, thank you, is where do you write? On the computer or notebooks? I write everywhere: journals, phones, scraps of paper, computer, notebooks. Then I feel at loose ends. I want to be more organized to find things again, ideas. That is a great question. Anyway,
I also write everywhere, all of that, computer, notebook, scraps of paper, all of that, it just depends on where I'm at and when the idea comes. And if I really sit down to write, if it's real early in the morning with a cup of coffee, I'll usually start in a notebook. But if I'm really serious about, okay, I really want to get this poem right, or really I want to get the puzzle of it so I can see it visually, then I might go to the computer. And because that's what I do. I usually write on the computer. Sometimes I'll sit at a desk if I'm just writing, notes or in a notebook. But so all of that.
I usually write in a notebook, and I always write longhand first, because I just feel like the handwriting, the physicalness of actually writing is an important part of the process for me. I feel like the computer is a little antiseptic. It's a little bit removed, and there's something very wonderful about the physicality of just writing things down. So if I do write on a scrap of paper or on a card or anything, a piece of newspaper or whatever, I tear it out and I can just slip it right in my notebook. And then after I feel like I have something that might be a poem, then I put it on my computer. And I have a bunch of different files. So I'll have, a poem every day if I'm writing a poem every day. Or when we were writing Field Guide, we didn't know the name of it then, but I'll put in Poems with Rebecca. And I'll have them on my computer so that I can find them easily. But yeah, I have so many notebooks in suitcases and in boxes, right, for all my life. And my goal is by my next birthday, which is in December, I am going to go through those notebooks and either, decide if they will become poems, or I think I might actually part with them.
I could never part. I mean, I turned around to say, oh, should I even show everybody? I have stacks and stacks of notebooks, and I love them in every color, and I love soft ones. But I don't know if I could ever get rid of a thing about notebooks. I was trying to think what I was going to say about it, because I think it's important to go back through them. And sometimes what I'll do is just circle places that I think, oh my goodness, I could use. It might have just been something I was thinking about, but it's a line that I think, oh, that would make a beginning of a poem. And so I think that's why they're important to keep, is you can go through and even find an idea or a line. And that gets me to, a lot of people ask, do you ever get writer's block? I get word block, like I just did, but I don't get writer's block too much, because it just seems like everywhere you look is an idea for a poem. And so I can't say I do. Now, sometimes when I'm working on a poem, I don't know where to go with it. I don't know how to close it or end it. I guess if you would want to call that a block, and I have to work through it. But I don't know. How about you, Georgia?
I don't really look at it as block, a writer's block. There are times when I don't write. And that's because we have busy lives. There are times when I don't actually put the words on paper, but I feel like even during that time, I am gathering, I'm observing, I'm feeling, and I feel like
Right.
I'm kind of preparing and percolating what might be poems in the future. And I don't lose hope. I think for those people who do have writer's block, which I think is a real thing. And I know that in times of my life, I've had that where I just feel like, okay, I don't know what to write down. I do think, Julia Cameron's morning pages really helps, where you take, every morning you write 3 pages in your notebook and you don't look at it. You just close the notebook and you go on, and the next morning you do the same thing. And then you can look at it maybe after a week. But I think the act of writing really cures what people call writer's block. Let me see if there are any other questions. Can you recommend a poetry book for children?
Well, I would recommend anthologies because instead of just one poetry book, I would recommend wonderful anthologies. There's so many. One is Talking Like the Rain, X.J. Kennedy and Dorothy Kennedy. Anything by Lee Bennett Hopkins, Climb Into My Lap, Side by Side. There's just so many. How about that one Paul wrote, Paul Janesco's Kick in the Head for Form, and great poetry. Pat Lewis, National Geographic poems. So that's where I would go, because you get such a variety. It's just like you open up the book and it's like surprise after surprise.
Yeah, and I would say, Rebecca, I love your book, Lemonade Sun, and their poems about summer. I love that. I love that book, and those are poems that are timeless. So, but yeah, anything like Lee Bennett Hopkins collected as an anthology, or anything that Paul Janesco collected as an anthology, I think those are some of the best anthologies out there. But there's so many, and well, that was a great question. And do we have time maybe for one more?
I know I read one that it said, how did you know you were going to be a writer? Or maybe about what age, or when did you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was probably around 8. I did keep a little notebook, and it was one of those little journals that had the lock and key, where you put the key.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know why I felt it was very important to have that kind of journal. Not that anybody was going to look at it in my house, but I just felt like there was something secret and beautiful about keeping my words in this place under lock and key. And it was mine. I had 3 sisters, and I love them, and but I just wanted it to be mine. And so I would put it in my little drawer. And my father went off to the Vietnam War, and I had, a lot of feelings about that. I mean, he was just gone. And so I began to write then in this little locked notebook. And I wrote and wrote and wrote, and didn't even know that you could really be a poet, or you could keep writing poetry throughout your life. That's something that you can do, until I went. I actually took a class when I was in college, and it was a poetry class and poetry writing. And I was just amazed at all these. I learned about W.S. Merwin, and I read poets that I had never ever read before. And I realized then, that you can actually keep writing poetry, not just in your locked journal. So I kept writing, and then I went to, I decided I wanted to go to poetry school, which was an actual thing. You can get your master's in fine arts and poetry. And I loved the poetry of Stanley Kunitz. So I found out where he was teaching, which was at Columbia University. And I applied to go there, and thinking that I would never, ever be able to get in and go there. And I actually got in. And so I was shocked and amazed. And I met Stanley Kunitz, who became my mentor for so many reasons, not just for writing poetry, but also just as a person. I think he was 89 when he was teaching, and he had so much life and vitality, and just so much. He was such a great teacher, that I realized that you can be a poet, you can write, and you can do this all your life. So that's how my journey happened.
And that is something to aspire to, his life, being 89 and still walking in his garden and loving everything he saw was a poem to him. I love that story. Okay, for me, we have some similarities, of course. Mine was pink with little gold scrolling on it. And I would say I was probably more like 10 or 11. And but before that, I loved music lyrics. And I would just look at the words on the inside of albums that my parents would have, like Pennies from Heaven. I would look at all the words from, the songs they would listen to in the 40s and the 50s. So I would look at all those words all the time and read those, and I would love the music. Then even as a little girl, I loved the rhythm of when my mom would read me, run, run as fast as you can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. That to me was poetry. It still is. It's got that beautiful rhythm to it. And but then when I was about 10 or 11 is when I started writing a lot of poetry, and mostly how I felt. It was mostly about first crushes. And similar to you, my favorite uncle in the whole world had been sent to Vietnam, and he was killed. And I wrote a lot about that all the time. And then in college, I took a lot of songwriting and poetry classes. And I don't know, it was just kind of always in me. I think that didn't know you could be a poet, but I think I always knew I wanted to do something with words and writing. Yeah.
Looking at the last, see if there are any other questions that are in the question box. And maybe we'll end with this one, Rebecca, about what advice would you give to an aspiring poet, writer?
Well, it's going to sound cliche, but the best advice is to read other poetry, to inspire you, to give you ideas, to open up your world, open up your mind to different poems, and to kind of, I don't know, that's all I can say. And then of course to just try it, don't be afraid, just put down words and ideas and lines, and take maybe a favorite poet, whether that be a children's poet or an adult poet, and look at them as your mentor, even though they're not in the same room with you. They really are, if you have their books. And, just try to, not of course copy them. I don't mean that, but be inspired by them, and just work on it and love it. That's the thing. If you have a passion for it and you love it, you'll find a way to do it.
That's beautiful. And I would say everything that Rebecca said about making sure that you read the poems that you love, find them. I mean, find the poems that you love, not the ones that you're supposed to love, but the ones that you really love, and create create a notebook. I have a notebook where I actually take poems and I glue them in.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then I write alongside it, or I write a poem in response to it. So that's really important for me, because so much of the time, if I feel like I'm not sure where to go in a poem, I'll read, and it will just trigger something in my voice. So that's, I agree with that. And then the other thing is, find a group, find a community, and find one person who is a really good listener, who will give you not just compliments and not just criticism, but make you feel like you can do this. And that's what Stanley Kunitz did for me. I realized he was 89 and he was still writing and he was still teaching. And I realized, poetry keeps us young. Poetry is something that you can do all of your life, and just believe it. And as Rebecca said, try not to be afraid, and find one person, whether it's a teacher or a friend or a relative, somebody that can listen to your words and exchange, poetry, maybe if they are also a poet. And that's, I think, finding Rebecca as a friend, as a poet, that's been very important for me as a writer too. So
right back at you.
Yeah. So I think we've come to the end of our first live chat, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for your questions and your comments, and we will hopefully do this again. And thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye.